Thank you so much for coming. This is the second event that we're having this week, hosted by the Law and Technology Society on venture capital and general counsel work. We're really excited. We've got a great panel ahead of us. But before we get started, if anybody is interested in signing up as a member of the Harvard Law and Technology Society, come up and talk to Jeff or myself after this. We're also recruiting a couple board members this semester, so just let us know. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Becca Vistola, who is our moderator. She is an HLS 3L and the president of HLab.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today. Before we get started, just to give our panelists a sense of who we have here in the room today. How many of you are 1Ls, 2Ls, 3Ls, and LLMs? Awesome, so it looks like we've got a pretty good mix today. Just to kick things off, I want to give a quick introduction of our panelists, but I invite all of you also to say any more that you guys want around your careers. So over on the right, we have Jeff, who's a partner at Gunderson. His practice focuses on the representation of private and publicly held emerging growth companies in the field of software, hardware, mobile, digital media, and consumer, as well as a number of biotechnology fields as well. He is also one of the co-chairs of the Venture Capital and Emerging Companies Committee of the Boston Bar Association. Then we have Mike Lincoln, who's a partner at Cooley. He's the firm-wide head of Cooley's business development department and in charge of lateral recruiting and strategy. His practice also focuses on emerging companies, venture capital, and M&A. He also was the co-founder of Cooley's first East Coast office. And then we have Jennifer Fang, who's a senior associate at Wilson Sonsini. She also practices advising startups and high-growth innovative clients and their board and management teams on a range of matters, including formation, corporate governance, security laws, and other legal matters. So we're really excited to have such an accomplished group of panelists here today. So especially given how many 1Ls we have in the room, I imagine we have a lot of students here today who are kind of wondering if they should already know what they want to do, starting to kind of explore their options and figure that out. So I'd love to hear from each of you. Is venture capital and startup work something you always knew you were interested in, or is there kind of a point that something pushed you in this direction?
Can I start? I'll pick it up. I actually am kind of a unique case. I had worked at a startup for probably 4 to 5 years before I went back to law school. So, I didn't come to law school knowing that that's what I would do, but after being here, taking the classes, seeing the kind of work in the areas that I gravitated towards, it was pretty clear that that was an environment I wanted to stay in and get back to. And so I kind of focused myself on that work, and then ended up during the OCI process for second year finding a firm that was kind of exclusively venture capital work, and then kind of making the leap there. So I wouldn't say that I kind of came to law school with that sole goal and focus, but I ended up with knowing that from my background, this was something I wanted to marry with the legal work. It's a question of finding the right space for it here. Which is really interesting, right? Because when you come out of and you do the 1L process, you finish your first year, you're doing your 2L OCI, you know absolutely nothing about the practice of law, about what kind of law you want to do. I did find out that even after 3 years, you don't really know that much. Law school is not great at teaching you how different practices are going to be. But it was a question of sort of finding firms that kind of the areas of law that you feel an attraction to, that you find a sort of place that you want to work. And so for me, it was being able to marry that experience with some of the side projects I've been doing here. I did a bunch of work with the Berkman Center, and it kind of helped me really solidify that direction.
Thanks for having me again, Mike Lincoln. And I started off, I went to UVA for law school. I was on law review, and everybody was applying for clerkship, so I applied for one and I got it. So I went to Chicago for a year on the 7th Circuit, and then went to Latham in DC. And at Latham, it was very much of a Wall Street oriented practice, even though I'm Washington DC. And I'm the oldest one here, so this was a long time ago. But so for me, I was doing private equity deals and grinding it out. Latham was a great experience. I had many friends there. But about 3-4 years into it, I saw what was happening in the Washington DC market where I was based, and there was just a lot going on. And I said, that's what I want to go do. And my mentor at Latham I talked to about it. He said at the time Latham was not interested in pursuing that kind of work, and so because I asked him, I said, how about if I go start an office for us, as a third-year associate, I'll go start an office for us out in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, blah, blah, blah. So that's what I did. And a few years into it, the Silicon Valley firms started to move east, and that was 1998, 99. And what happens, of course, is AOL goes public, some things happen where people take note, venture capital flows in, and then the infrastructure around it starts to develop, including law firms. And so that's how I ended up at Cooley 20 years ago. And we'll talk more about how the practice differs. But for me, I always had small-time entrepreneurial type businesses, and I knew I didn't want to be a litigator for sure. I thought the corporate side, large corporations, private equity was pretty interesting, but then you get a taste of it, and it's just like the clients that we work with, entrepreneurs. If you ever work with an entrepreneur who started off at Microsoft or Cisco or someplace, and then they go to a startup or a high-growth company, rarely do you find somebody that goes to an emerging company and says, you know what, I think I'd rather go back to a place with a little more bureaucracy. I like the long meetings with lots of people. I like to drag things out. It's right. I mean, that just doesn't. Honestly, I don't know anybody myself that has made that move. It's a little bit like that with law. I think you go to this kind of practice, and I think it's a bit of a one-way street. You might go to one of our companies or to a venture firm, but the notion that you're going to say, I'd really like to go back to more of a Wall Street practice, I don't know that anybody would say.
So my story actually started in high school. I thought I wanted to be a patent lawyer because I grew up in the original tech boom, and I really liked startups, and I was into coding and doing all the software. And so I wanted to work with startups, but I actually didn't know that there was a corporate practice that was specifically for startups. And just to give you a little bit of context, I actually graduated law school in 2009, and I think that's when the National Venture Capital Association actually launched their first set of model legal documents. And so even during the time that I was in college and law school, the industry was still pretty nascent, and everyone had their own competing forms, right? And so I went to college thinking, all right, I'm gonna pick a science and become a patent lawyer. Went to law school thinking maybe I'll be a patent lawyer, and then actually I took corporate tax, and I loved that. And I was like, okay, well, one of the reasons why I went to law school was because I knew no lawyers, and I wanted to go into an industry where I could make connections and figure out really good lawyers and introduce them to my community, and essentially attack the things that were really a mystery and complicated. And so then I realized, oh wait, tax is even more complicated, and so maybe I'll go down that path. And as I was considering different law firms for my 2L year and even 3L year, I ended up having to make a choice between two firms. I was actually even interviewing with the IRS to potentially work for their small business group, because I thought, all right, I want to be able to bring the law to the community and be able to share what I know and help them. But ultimately, I went with my first job, and I started off being a startup lawyer because I realized that you can work with the innovation, discover there was this practice that you can do. And the interesting thing that's different about patent law versus corporate law is that most patent practices back in the day were really working with in-house folks who already picked out the strategy, and they're really just like trying to figure out what's the best way to get a patent. And there was less of the kind of like strategic portfolio development that I'm seeing these days. Whereas on the corporate side, you are working with the management team and you're working with the board, and there's absolutely a large part of it where you're helping the company succeed. And that was what drove me to patent law, was I wanted to help innovation get into industry, and one of the big things you need to do is help the company succeed so that their technology can actually translate into a product or service and be launched. And so, and some of the most challenging things you can see, if you just read the headlines, are related to the business side rather than related to the patent side. And so that's how I ended up here.
One follow-up on one thing you said is really interesting. One of the ways to think about this that I've learned to do over the years is the legal and the business will always intersect at some point, right? Because the business, that's why the company is there. That's what they're trying to do, is succeed and accomplish their business goals. The legal side is really, sort of understanding how to write contracts, how to structure transactions, how to interface with regulatory issues. And there's always an intersection point where the legal is being translated to business decision makers, and you're telling them, somebody is telling them, hey, this is how you need to think about these legal issues in the the context of achieving your business strategic goals. And depending on the practice you're in, one of the great things about venture is that you're often that point person. You're often the one who's sitting there talking to business people and telling them about, hey, this is what you need to be thinking about. This is kind of key issues. These are things I've seen before in similar deals that went wrong or went right. And you're not talking to lawyers. And that's a huge difference in day-to-day life, because when you're in a larger kind of, some of these larger practices, your client, the person who's calling you for advice, is maybe 2 or 3 levels down inside a GC group at a large company. And so what you're doing there is feeding information back to the point person who's sort of sitting at that business and legal intersection. And I think anybody who's here who does this practice says that's where the interesting part of the job is. That's right where the business and the legal intersect. And so as you describe that, it's just, when you think about different types of practices and how your life will be as a practicing lawyer, that's a helpful construct to think about, okay, who am I talking to? Who am I giving advice to?
I was going to say, Jeff's exactly right. This may seem like a not huge deal, but all of us work more with people in business or investors, the investors behind the businesses, than lawyers. And if you're at a larger firm, there's nothing wrong with it, you may prefer this, but if you're working with the in-house legal department, we're working with the founders of the companies, the CEOs, the board members, whatever, at least initially. Again, once they get bigger, they hire a general counsel, and things change for us, but we usually stay intently involved. But for those of you that are considering this kind of practice, the thing that's amazing about it is how gratifying it is to work with a company that brings a new drug to market that helps cure disease, or to work with a company that creates thousands of new jobs. And if you look at the statistics in the last 20 years, it's about 20% of the US economy job growth is from venture-backed companies. So to me, it's like really gratifying to work with entrepreneurs and companies that are doing disruptive things to change the world. And every now and then you work with a company and say, it's a mobile app or a game or something. It's hard to get too jazzed about that, other than creating jobs. But a lot of companies we work with do just amazing things. And so it feels very rewarding. And the last thing I'll say about that is the role of the lawyer is just very different, which is if you work with a founder, let's just say you help a company go public or you sell them for hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, you're at the closing dinner and you're celebrating with them and they view you as part of the family, right? That's just so fundamentally, not just a lawyer, but usually a business advisor, consigliere, whatever you want to say. And to me, that part as compared to another type of practice is just so much more rewarding. And a lot of times, by the way, the entrepreneurs are motivated by such amazing altruistic motives. Yes, sure, there's ego involved, but I don't see many people race out, as soon as they close the deal, they don't go buy a brand new sports car. I mean, I think.
Except for the WeWork guy.
Well, don't get me wrong, money is a motivator, but one of the things I learned early on is it's so far down the list. And a lot of times the money is, there's something else about it. Like, I can think of a guy I work with whose parents immigrated from another country. His parents had college degrees, but his dad drove a cab and cleaning houses, typical immigrant story. And I remember the first thing he did after the closing, he bought his parents a house. And I remember when he thanked us, he didn't thank us for helping to raise money or sell the company. He thanked us for this much more profound, for helping his parents achieve their dream for him. And I tell you that because it doesn't happen every time, but there's a lot of instances where the motivation behind somebody, or a family member is sick and they're focused on some drug discovery or whatever, the motivations are deep, and the money oftentimes is a proxy for something else.
Great. I want to follow that thread a little bit that you guys started to hit on about what makes this particular type of transactional practice different over the next year or so. I'm guessing a lot of you will start to get this sense of whether you're more litigation focused or more transactional focused. Given that you're in this room, I'm guessing a lot of you lean toward the latter. But I hear a lot of students often talking about how they're supposed to figure out, if they want to go to an M&A practice, or capital markets practice, or emerging companies practice. Can you guys talk a little bit about what kind of makes those practices different? Are there different personality types or work styles that might fit one or the other better?
So just to clarify, I think all of us on this panel, we work with early stage startups and we do formation and venture representing the investors and the company, but we also do M&A and capital markets as well. So there is overlap with folks who are just in the M&A group and folks who are in the capital markets group. And I think what the difference is that if you look at the transactional practice, there are deals and then there are relationships. And our practice is very relationship driven, which is really one of those things that I didn't expect. Like I'm friends with folks who I was introduced to as clients where a partner said, hey, can you just go pitch this guy? Like when I was the first year, I had to sit down and take someone out to lunch and just talk to him because he was actually an HBS student and they didn't have time to talk to him, right? And we're still friends now. To friends of friends who I get to meet because they're thinking about something cool and they need some advice. And so people are constantly introducing me to them, and it's about building these relationships, and you're doing all the transactions that you can handle, potentially in parallel with you bring in some experts as needed, whether they need labor employment help or litigation help, hopefully not too much, or anything else. And sometimes if the M&A transaction is really complicated or there's a debt component, you might bring somebody in. When I was starting out, I did think about just doing capital markets, and I mean, you can already tell that I think about trying everything, and then it's over time I've narrowed down into this practice. But one of the things that I didn't particularly enjoy as a junior M&A person was that I felt like by the time lawyers were involved, you were just allocating risk, and you were just negotiating back and forth, and I didn't really like that. I wanted to do something that was very productive. But I will say that now, 10 years in, when I'm doing M&A, I find it really enjoyable because it's usually, if I'm on the sell side, it's a capstone to a long-term relationship. You see how exciting it is for the company and they've worked. We just did this deal, and fortunately in 3 years I was able to work with them from a startup to their sales to Merck. And you can see how you've helped them through the point where their company is now able to be sold, is an attractive product candidate for a large pharma company like Merck, and that's really, really exciting. All of a sudden, that M&A has more meaning that you just got brought in to do risk allocation. Or we take a company public, and that's also really exciting. So it's like their first debut as a debutante ball type thing, and you're kind of helping them get dressed up and organized, and it just, in my mind, having that relationship provides so much additional meaning and why I get up every day to do the work I do.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I mean, I think there's probably, at some point, maybe about 3 to 4 or 5 years in this practice when you have the experience Karen just described the first time, which is somebody who showed up, you helped them form the company, you kind of did a few financing rounds, you helped them, you were the sort of outside general counsel for everything, they saw the word law, they call you, even if it has nothing to do with anything you know, but you're able to sort of quarterback, right? You get on the phone and hear other lawyers, give them advice, and you say, okay, here's my perspective on that. And then you take them through and they sell. And then you're sitting there and the M&A process is hard, it's brutal, it's 24/7, there's real-time pressures. When a company like Merck is buying something, that could go wrong if you wait 2 days. And so it's the lawyer's job to make sure that doesn't wait 2 days. But you're sitting there and it's late at night, you're looking at this spreadsheet, you're seeing everybody who's getting paid on this deal. And you're seeing the founders are getting this big check, you're seeing the investors are getting this big check. And there was this moment where I was like, when the first time through and it comes in each one of these deals, it's like, I'm glad I participated in this, I'm glad I helped this, because you see how hard it is, and you say, these guys deserved it, or these men and women who who were able to build a company, which is a really hard thing to do, and they were able to get, the incentive alignment that comes out of these small startups where everyone is kind of fairly closely aligned in most cases. And you say the investors deserve their money for getting involved, picking the right companies, helping and advising it through. And there's just this sort of feeling, well, look, this is something I'm glad I helped out with. And, it goes back to when I was in law school here, I remember getting advice from someone who was describing being at a huge firm and kind of finishing the end of the day, taking a car home at 2 a.m. and the thought to themselves is, what did I do today? I squeezed out 3 basis points for Goldman on some international transaction. And it's just the difference between how that feels because it's going to be a ton of work, right? I mean, there's just the way we are only involved with companies when they are in 24/7 high action mode. And so there is no point in this you're just not going to have a relaxed way that they're gonna use your service. But you think about how do I get to a place where the service that I have, that I'm able to provide is something I'm happy to have contributed to. And to Mike's point, I mean, sometimes it's drug development, sometimes it's cool things like self-driving cars, sometimes it's totally goofy stuff like some new app or some new social media thing. But even that, there's this impressive element of what it takes to go from an idea to an actual company that people are willing to, that large companies are willing to spend a few $100 million on. And then, to Mike's other point, the founders always come right back because they end up going into a huge company. They see that it's bureaucracy. They see that more of their energy is spent trying to improve their department versus the other departments, and they want to go back to sort of the simplicity and the cleanness of the incentive alignment that happens at these startups when everyone is kind of pulling the same direction and trying to get the company over the line.
I'll just add one other thing. I think Jennifer described it exactly right, which is the difference between a transactional practice and a relationship.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Oh, sorry,
Jennifer.
If you are doing M&A or capital markets, if you think about it, it's a little bit like the difference between seeing a movie from start to finish and maybe just seeing one segment of a movie. So if you're transactional and you parachute in, you do an M&A deal, you do an IPO, it's actually really cool. But if you're an emerging companies where it tends to be the case that you see the good and the bad, that the sort of that's more linear from start to the culmination, all the companies you work with are driving towards some liquidity event. So I think that part of it is different. And what I think, a lot of what you learn in this is by osmosis. And so, for example, going to board meetings, it's not something I ever really thought when I was sitting in your chair in law school, but after you do this for a long time, you learn how to read financial statements, you understand direct and indirect sales channels, you understand product development. I don't mean the same way you might if you were doing it for firsthand, but you get pretty darn good at it. And that way, for those of you who decide you want to go do something else, it's pretty applicable to going and being part of a startup. I actually know a lot of lawyers that started companies or part of high growth companies, and they fit right into this kind of practice. It lends itself to that exposure and osmosis.
Yeah. And a lot of lawyers actually who want to go in-house, they end up switching into this practice for a couple of years so that they can land that job. I would say if you guys want to work in-house and you want to work in a firm for a little bit, the two that I find are most translatable are if you're a licensing lawyer, you're very much in high demand, and second, if you're a startup lawyer, people like that general practice. They also like the skills that you develop having business judgment. I mean, at the end of the day, you need to be kind of like an independent thinker and be able to make a decision from the startup as to here's the legal context, here are the business risks, and here is how we balance the two.
Yeah, you're very much not, you talked about risk allocation before, you're very much not a risk eliminator, right? A lot of times in a very large environment, the lawyer's job is just to, the sort of stereotypical lawyer just says no to everything because there's risk, right? A startup lawyer who sort of counsels their clients away from any risk period is useless, right? Absolutely useless to the clients because the point of these things is they're new companies, they're coming up off the ground. What you need to do is help them sort out between theoretical risks that really are probably not things to worry about and sort of, okay, these are real risks that will potentially impair the trajectory you're on. You want to get this company financed and sold, if you agree to something like what's in this contract, you're going to hurt that possibility. Nobody wants to hear you. My clients never want to hear me talk about, well, it's theoretically possible that this and this and this and this could happen, it would be that. And part of it is just the nature of, if you work for a client that has billions and billions and billions in assets, your job is to help protect those assets. It's easier to be a Democrat when you're younger, right? You just don't have a lot to share, a lot to give up. And so the startups, they're not protecting downside, right? You're not there isn't this sort of big pool of assets that are at risk if you as a lawyer give the wrong answer. Instead, they just want to hear, okay, how do I get this deal done and get to the next phase?
So I've heard a lot of discussion about how personally rewarding it can be to develop those client relationships over years, and also about how engaging it is to kind of balance that role between being a legal advisor and a business advisor to the client. I would love to hear a little bit about how being on the investor side compares, if you guys have done any of that work, and sort of how
Sure. So I think about investors in two camps. So there are the typical private equity and venture investors, and then there are also the strategic investors. And I think that when you're talking about risk, it's actually an even bigger issue on investment side, than company side, in terms of when you're talking about just the venture transaction. Like from the day-to-day, you're going to be counseling your company on the risk, but in some ways, when you're doing a venture financing, I feel that like the attorneys and the company, they have this approach of like, hey, is this good enough? Is this good enough? Like we're going to provide you, here's our records, is this fine? Whereas on the investor side, when you're representing them, you have to look at it and say, okay, well, this is what happened. And a lot of times these days, we're investing in companies where their records are missing because they switched counsel 3 times, and we don't actually know if the directors were properly elected or where the stockholders were. And there's mechanisms that you can use to clean up. Like Delaware came out with this Section 204 ratification. But maybe they also issued options without like 498 compliant actions, like they didn't get a valuation report. And so then you have to then explain to your client as a venture investor, strategic investor, and try to help them understand, hey, what risks are they taking on? Whereas the company's just like, just please give us the money. What can we do? What do you need us to do? And a lot of times your investor will say, all right, what do you recommend that we do? Should we force them to get a 204 ratification right now, or can we wait? Do we think that we really need to get, valuation reports, and does that solve it? And if we get a valuation report now, what are the risks here, and how do we think about what's the size? And a lot of times you mentioned learning all sorts of skills. Excel's a great skill, PowerPoint's a great skill, but you're gonna find that you're gonna be doing a lot of math and saying, all right, well, here's the option size that was problematic, and here's like a strike price, and like, let's calculate out what the potential taxes are there. And so there's a lot of risk and guidance that you're gonna have to provide on the investor side. Then when you're talking about strategic investors, then it gets really tricky, because a lot of times these strategic investors may want to buy the company, or they're partnering and they have a commercial deal. And in our practice, we actually often use our licensing lawyers in tandem, and then there's a coordination around that. And then the company may have all sorts of sensitivities about what kind of information will they be willing to share, since your investor is strategic, and they may be doing a deal with a competitor of your client, and so they may not want to share that, and so it's just really fun, and I actually really enjoy the strategic deals.
Yeah, I'd say the big difference on the venture side and the company side is asymmetrical experience and integration. For the most part, the hand-holding, as you would imagine, on the business side, is much more significant, unless it's a serial entrepreneur that's not at a bunch of times. And on the venture side, they do it all the time. The exception, of course, is brand new fund or a brand new partner within a fund. They might say, hey, Jennifer, sits down and does a tutorial on venture financing, because you may have learned it at HBS or Wharton, but now it's game time and it's a little different, like a lot of things. So I think it's pretty asymmetrical. And if you're working with young founders that have never done this, it's all gibberish. And most of them that I have my experience, most founders don't really want to read a stack of documents. They really want you to distill it down and tell me the 5 things I care about. Tell me what you do in my shoes. Every now and then you get an outlier, somebody who reads the documents and really wants to understand liquidation preferences in great detail. But by and large, that's not the way it works. And so the advisory coaching role on the company side is significant.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the investors, what can happen on the investor side, this is an industry, Jennifer mentioned it earlier, with sort of form documents. This is an industry where the base transaction has been fairly standardized. And so with investors, I find I spend more of my time thinking about, okay, we know what the base transaction is. Is there anything special in the deal we're doing here that we should be thinking a little differently about? Okay, maybe the base transaction terms apply 99% of the time, but there's something unique in this case. And so sometimes the answer is no, right? And sometimes it's like, okay, well, let's just move to execution phase, figure out how to get the deal done, the money wired, and the company back to focusing on growth and product development. But the more interesting work with investors is when you are sort of helping to structure, when you're saying, okay, this is not just a vanilla transaction, but this transaction has some interesting wrinkles we need to think about. You see that more, I think, in the life science side these days. The sort of traditional funding model of venture capital has worked really well with the way the tech world has moved, where companies are able to do a lot with smaller amounts of money and much younger companies, whereas life science has kind of gone the opposite way. And so, to get a drug developed is such an enormous amount of money that you end up having to do these kind of creative financing structures. And if you look at the venture capitalists who are most successful in life science these days, they're starting to sort of build things, right? As opposed to just, it's not the model of you find a couple people in the garage and you give them a bunch of money and they take off. And so that part of that, I think the investor side will end up having in some ways more specificity. The real challenge is saying, okay, we know what vanilla is, how do I fit what's in front of me into vanilla and make sure I didn't just kind of slip down the sort of middle of the fairway and miss something important.
So I think for a lot of students, kind of following this thread of having these negotiations and being on the investor and company side, would imagine negotiations as being sort of a one-off, high-pressure, all-or-nothing situation. But in the VC and emerging company world, where there's a lot of repeat players and the ecosystem might be smaller than people think, do your relationships with VCs you've worked with before, founders you've worked with before, how does that play into having these negotiations, dealing with non-market terms or unusual circumstances where you might deviate from those documents?
Yeah, so it is a very small community. So not only will you see repeat players on the founder side, as well as the investor side, and sometimes you are actually opposite your investor clients or opposite executives that you had worked with before. But you also see repeat players in attorneys. So it's a very small community, and I think this goes for all practice, but your reputation and your people's ability to trust you is really at the end of the day the key to the practice, right? And so you want to go in with real authenticity and when you're negotiating, it's not just for the win, it's all about being able to be reasonable. I think is more important, and just to think about it, at the end of the day, your client, whether they're an investor or the company, they're trying to enter a partnership. And so they want to be able to work together, so it's not about who's going to win, it's about how do we get this transaction to a process where everyone's happy and so that they can move forward and they're not suspicious with each other, right? And so I think that establishing a reputation where you're trustworthy and also reasonable, I think is really important. And then when you need to fight for something, then it really matters. And people will, if you can then explain, hey, why do we need this? If there's certain circumstances, there's definitely things that happen where you need to be off market because of whatever the facts are. Sometimes it might just be, when I'm representing a company, it might be that, hey, the entrepreneur had a really bad experience with their prior investor, and so they are not willing to give up on this term because you just have to get them over that fear. And sometimes the investor is willing to accept that. They'll say, all right, we're willing to take that risk because we trust that the company is, and the entrepreneur, the CEO or whomever it is, will not mess us up, right? So they will be willing to concede a term that they may not in a different situation, and being able to explain that and explain why is this an off-market request, but at the same time applies here is really key.
So I would say it is the least acrimonious type of practice. If you like to argue and want to be pugnacious and pound on the table, you should definitely go be a litigator or something, because it's super counterproductive in this kind of practice. And when we see Wilson or Gunderson across the table on a deal, we're psyched about it because honestly we get on the phone and in a few minutes. That's not to say negative things about other firms, but we go right in the middle of the 40-yard lines. And that's where the game is played in this business. Every now and then there's something idiosyncratic and you explain it. I can never remember an argument, sort of screaming match the way I used to see in a prior life. And then it's reputational in the way that you get a reputation. And then the venture firms, I teach a class at UVA Law School, so I have a guest every week, and my guest the other day was from NEA, and he told my class, look, if I see a lawyer on a deal behave badly or take non-market positions, like internally at our Monday partner meeting, we're like we're not using that firm again. Maybe you, and some people, every now and then you get founders who think it's all in session, you have to call home cooking, like, oh yeah, you know all the venture firms, so you guys are sort of all in bed with one another. There's an element of truth to that. But the venture firms, which drive this business, they don't want to play, whether it's a firm or an individual, somebody who takes non-market positions, doesn't understand the rules of the road, that's a huge problem, and it'll come back to bite you.
Yeah, I think it is one of the, it's a great practice area for the reputational reasons, right? Because it is highly reputationally driven, right? And so, if you, like I always compare it with PE, right? And a private equity, like someone who's kind of, one of the large private equity firms that's buying mature businesses, figuring out how to squeeze more value out of them and put them back on the market and sell for profit. Their job and their mindset of the world is, how do I take something that's here and just squeeze it just a little bit harder? And they know they've squeezed too hard when someone starts yelling. And it's just, it's a kind of world where their mindset is always about, I'm giving large amounts of money to people, that's why you're working with me, and there's a zero-sum element where I'm just gonna push as hard as I can. With venture, the risk, the reputational risk to a venture capitalist and a venture firm is huge, because there's a limited number of great founders and great deals. If you have a reputation as a VC of being a jerk, of being difficult to work with, of being somebody who's not going to be trustworthy when you get to the other side of a deal or when you hit a rough spot on the road, you get passed over for the best deals, right? So when people see repeat founders go out and start a company, they're always activating the relationships that they've had in the past and bringing the same people they've worked with well. And so, being a jerk in one situation might be like, you squeeze a few more nickels out of that company, but you've just cost yourself as a venture capitalist the opportunity to get a whole slew of good deals. And what that does is it just, that permeates through the whole kind of the atmosphere, right? There's a reason why the sort of the deals are generally collegial. The deals are kind of, when you're doing them, they're mostly kind of putting a transaction together. They view it as a partnership that is being formed, and so they're going to work together. Not to say you don't hit rough spots, but the general focus, the general tenor of all of these deals is, hey, I got to get what I negotiated for. Just because this is all about reputation doesn't mean I'm going to let my economics get stripped away because I took someone else's money and put it in your company. That's what VCs are doing, right? They're grabbing money from their partners and putting it in companies. I need to make sure I get the deal that I negotiated for, but there is very little opportunity for pushing super hard. Because again, the VC doesn't want to move a 1x return to a 1.5x return. They want a 1x return to go to a 100x return. Like, the Ubers and the Facebooks and huge successes. And so that color is kind of the way in which people in the industry interact. Not to say you don't have your hostile moments, not to say you don't occasionally have some good elbow bumping, but the reality is these general deals do have a much more kind of constructive tone about how do we get to the deal that everybody wants to do.
One point to add to that is sometimes, and this is something I didn't anticipate, and now I will volunteer, sometimes your clients will want to be more friendly, and so as a lawyer, sometimes you have to take one for the team. So sometimes they want to be really reasonable, but secretly they actually want you to push a little bit more, and they will ask you to make that ask, and it allows them to have a little bit of distance. And using that effectively and being able to make that ask, but also not damage the overall relationship and the dynamics is important. But just be wary. Like, there's definitely been times where I know consciously that I'm being thrown under the bus, and that's our job as lawyers sometimes.
So when I came into law school, I didn't have any sort of business background, and when I realized I wanted to do this sort of work, I felt like I needed to light a fire under my feet and kind of catch up. For students in the room who are interested in doing focused practice, but maybe don't have that background, are there certain classes, experiences, things like that you would recommend to those students to kind of get themselves started?
I think you mentioned HLEP, which is a great program, and we've been working with HLEP for as long as our offices has been open, so for about 3 years. But like doing clinics, actually, I think this is the one practice where being a generalist is really important. And when we're actually constructing our summer classes, I do look for diversity of experiences, because at the end of the day, it's about being able to issue spot and then being able to connect with people on different issues. And so if everyone has exactly the same background, it's not going to necessarily be able to be helpful to our very, very diverse set of clients. So, other than maybe taking a few entrepreneurship related activities or classes, like I wouldn't necessarily say like you have to have a specific curriculum. Like take what you're interested in, and it'll probably come back to you at some point, surprisingly. And also you're then connecting also with other attorneys, and I think that the network that you have is probably one of the most valuable things you can bring to your practice, right? So if you think about it, you're going to be the general counsel, and so you need to have a network of experts who you can rely on when there's some kind of odd question. Like I had one client one time who called me up and said there was a Craigslist listing. Someone was impersonating a company to list job opportunities on Craigslist, which is just so odd. Like there was no way that I could have prepared for that. But then, you have to have experts, and that's why I like working at a big firm like Wilson is to have already kind of like an in-network group of experts. But just generally, you'll want to have people that might not be in your law firm that you can call on. So if you take, some class that seems a little unrelated, it might actually open your network to that as well.
I would take classes you're interested in and enjoy.
Yeah.
Two exceptions maybe, accounting and tax. If there's an accounting, if you have law business type curriculum, obviously it's great to understand accounting. And then, sometimes law students will work with a startup on the side, pitching in some hours, whatever. That exposure could be helpful. I've known a number of students that have done that. And then the thing that is not really taught in school that you're going to use no matter what you do is sales, business development. No one ever really talks about that, but whatever you do, going to a law firm, going to a company, just about everybody, other than maybe the engineers and programmers in a company, but even that maybe all founders, even technology-oriented founders that are engineers, have to learn how to go sell. And so, to the extent you can find exposure to people, be around people who are good at sales and business development, that's an amazing opportunity.
I'd reiterate there that the Excel and the accounting, it is surprising. This is a practice that does get you into what I'd call low-level financial modeling, low-level capitalization structures, where you have to, with a lawyer, and it's just by nature of who's at the table. A lot of times the lawyer's the only one who's sort of able to put together the Excel. Because once you go to the high-end transactions, you're in capital markets, you're in billion-dollar M&A, there is a fleet of investment bankers who have all the numbers down. They're in charge of the Excel. The lawyers don't touch the numbers. There's somebody, the banks, the Panelists, and the Goldmans of the world, they own those. When you get down to the kind of Series A, Series B financings that we do, that are our bread and butter, there's no one else there, right? There's no banker there to be able to sort of, who's got the job, making sure the math is right. The company might have finance personnel, they usually will, but sometimes that's not much more than a bookkeeper. And frankly, it's kind of a wasted skill for somebody who's at a startup to be really good at structuring Series A and Series B financings, because if you're at the startup internally, you're going to do one, right? 1A, 1B, and who knows where it goes from there. And so it ends up falling back to the lawyer to be the sort of partner who's the person who's the only one on the team who's able to say, oh, okay, I know how to get this done. And it's not complicated, but it is a surprise to a lot of people that, wait a second, I did law school, not business school, why do I got numbers again? And I think you have to be comfortable with numbers in order to succeed in this practice. Other than that, I would just reiterate that, tax is always everywhere. It's one of the sort of immovables, and so it'll dictate, even if you're not in tax practice, when you bump into tax issues, you'll need to be able to understand at a sort of high enough level to be able to sort of figure out how it fits into what you do.
Great, thank you so much. Before we run out of time, I want to open it up to the room. Does anybody have any questions for our panelists?
following up on the advice to get the skills we need, you were saying you went to law school, not business school. I'm wondering if you could talk through any factors we should consider if we're thinking about doing the MBA route versus the JD, and how important it is either for relationships or skills versus the obvious cost of losing the time and the expense to spend another year in school.
So I actually had that decision making when I was in Penn, so I was actually deciding between spending my time, and I took my GMAT right before I went to start law school, and so I was deciding between applying to Wharton or spending that month applying to one-all jobs, and I didn't have time for both because I didn't pass my exams, right? I think that if you want to do this practice, and I actually got a similar advice when I was thinking about doing patent law, whether I should get a PhD or not, is just go and start. I mean, there are many great things about doing an MBA, but if you're trying to do that to leverage your practice, I think having the experience is much more important. It's a very fast-moving practice, and I would say, like even looking at our first year, so they summered, and then they kind of clerked through their 3-all year, and now at the end of the first year, they can run transactions, they can onboard clients, and so just like within a span of a year and a half, they can do a lot of the basics. They can't necessarily run an IPO or M&A, but they're going to get there pretty quickly. And so, having that experience is direct right then and there, and there's a lot of costs. I mean, you're going to be earning money learning that than going to MBA. At least that's the calculus I made.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. I almost did the JD MBA at UVA, but I worked for 4 years, so for me it was just anxious to get out there, and I was completely broke. So I think if you can spare the time, when I see a JD MBA, I love that, and I think most of the firms like ours, I mean, all things being equal, geez, for our kind of practice, it's nothing but a plus.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think I agree with both these two, as hard as that seems to be, but since they kind of said different things. But it's definitely a plus, whether or not it's a year's worth plus. So if you think about JD MBA versus someone I know who's done exactly my practice for a year, I'm probably going to gravitate towards the person who's done my practice for a year, because to the point that Jennifer made, they're just going to have reps, and they're going to have a set of reps that is going to mean I can get them kind of in and moving and working faster. Whereas JD MBA, that helps me kind of say, okay, when they run into the areas of this practice that has business overlap, when they get stuck on, I just working on M&A the other day, and we got stuck on some really thorny kind of rev rec issue for the way the company was processing some of their accounting, and it was material to the deal, right? There was real dollars and cents on the table, and I had to figure it out because the accountants were speaking to each other in languages the business people didn't understand. And then no one, the bankers were looking at it, and it was like, okay, ultimately, it's in the legal document that's in my domain, and it has to be right. And so having that ability to sort of get those things solved faster is a definite plus. But yeah, I think it just comes back to the fact that, does it end up being worth that year or worth that time?
And adding to that, one thing that you guys might not think about, but hate to be the person to say this, but like, your hourly billing rate is getting higher and higher, and a lot of times firms might recognize if you have like a master's or a PhD or MBA and give you that second year bump, and so you're getting paid at a second year salary and you're treated as a second year, which sounds great, but then all of a sudden you're being billed out at a higher rate and the expectations are higher, and being competing against an actual true second year who's been around the block for a whole year can be pretty challenging. I've seen that play out whether on the corporate side with MBA students or on the patent side with folks who, got year bumps for different things. And in this environment where doing startup work is very cost conscious, like having even a difference of like $50 per hour can be huge in terms of like what the expectations are. And so just be conscious of that. Like, even though you might feel like, oh, well, I'm gonna get a salary bump because I got my MBA and I'll be at the same level, you're gonna be coming in with a slightly different experience.
Improve your $500 an hour, okay? First years these days, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question, and a student from our class, and so I would ask if you got a resume
I mean, but it also depends, honestly, like, you know, because we're in places like Shanghai and Beijing, and so a lot of times, the combination of experience and relationships, language, and so forth makes for a good combination. And we like experience, and Jeff was saying a moment ago, if you see somebody that's got a few years of experience in our kind of practice, whatever that experience is, by the way, it could be in the Marine Corps, but all things being equal, for some reason, it seems to be really helpful in working with emerging companies.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. First of all, it would be with the mindset that you guys mentioned. We can safely say that generally law school prepares you, precisely as Dettmer mentioned, to identify risk and just move around it. And with ventures, well, you have risk all around you. How do you just change your mindset from being a lawyer that moves away through that risk to being a lawyer in the table that just runs through it and gives sound advice to the entrepreneur of the way it should go and not be like a deal breaker lawyer in the table? Just first, what recommendations would you have to make that mind shift?
I think you still have to identify the risk, but you have to, it's easy, like, once you identify the risk, the easy thing to do is to say, it's risk, up to you. And what you have to do in our practice is identify the risk and put it in context, right? So you're still doing that same thing, look, you're still a lawyer, you're still the sort of worst case scenario engineer. You're looking around, you're saying, what could go wrong? How do I bring that back and help the client make decisions? But the difference is that you pay much more attention to probability, likelihood of downside results, right? Like I see all sorts of rules that my clients just don't follow on a regular basis. I know which ones are going to blow them up in a Series A financing. An investor comes in and says, wow, that could really hurt the company, versus ones that I can fix with $5,000. Like there's certain elements that can be quickly fixed later if the company gets to the stage where it's worth putting the time and energy into fixing it.
Okay, and just a quick second question. How do you cope with the fields on which your assessments are going? Because I imagine you guys work in like with ventures on not just software, but biotechnology, healthcare IT, I don't know, these are fields that are constantly changing. So how do you cope with giving an advice today for a medium or long-term assessment when those are fields that are constantly changing and emerging new markets, and your competitor across the street might be thinking of something more creative than the agreement that you just signed a couple of weeks ago?
Well, there's some sectors where there's domain knowledge, like say in life sciences, where a lot of the practitioners have a PhD or the scientific background. But for many of us, historically it's been horizontal, not industry focused. Your generation is much more likely to say, I want to do fintech or edtech, and you'll get up to speed on a sector, and you'll have the domain knowledge, certainly enough to do what we do pretty quickly. And indeed, some of you will become, if you think about it, like there are no, like take autonomous vehicles or some sector where you say, oh, well, is there anybody that's been doing it for 20 years in the legal profession? No, about 10. You start to quickly realize, so like I know a lawyer who's jumped in and learned the Clean Air Act in 1970, and he rode that way for decades, right? Because guess what? He was a leading authority when the monster new statute was passed. That's going to happen for all of you if you think about data security, privacy, and on and on. That's the beauty of this space. You may be one of the leading experts a few years out of law school, believe it or not.
Question up there?
All right.
One more question?
Sure, we'll take one.
I guess just going off with the other question, how international, based on your experience, how international is the ecosystem? So I guess I'm asking both on like, do you have founders of multiple like international backgrounds, or like is there any transnational elements of the at all?
Less than there used to be, even just a couple of years ago. All of our firms have international offices. We're in Singapore, we're in Beijing. There is a huge component of, when you talk about sort of founders in the company, the stats show there's a disproportionate number of large founders are foreign-born in the US, founders of large companies. I would say it moves around a lot because it does get, like, for instance, we were close to opening up an office in Brazil because Brazil had this booming startup economy for a while, And so our business is just, look, wherever the VCs are, wherever the startups are, wherever that capital is going, we go with it and do that work. It ended up turning fairly rapidly. And so you see the same thing with Chinese capital now, right? There's a new set of restrictions that the government has put in place under the foreign investment rules have started really pulling back on some of that international capital. But it really is just a question of we're following where the business guys and the businessmen and women are putting the money to work.
Yeah, my practice is pretty international. So being in Boston, and I focus on life sciences, there are a lot of companies that are somewhere else and they want to move to Boston, or actually we do a lot of Chinese investments where they're licensing their Chinese rights to the Chinese investors. So as you mentioned, FIRMA is a very, very big part of our transactions these days. And trying to navigate the rules and it's a changing landscape is pretty challenging, but that's also going to your question earlier, like we like the fact that it's very dynamic. I think personality wise, we don't want to just learn the law today and it's the same practice. Like I think it's like riding this wave. It's going to be constantly changing. And I also see that there's more of a narrowing of industry. So I think like now I see in our firm as like life sciences and tech, but I think that will also get further more specialized, and there might be we have a cryptocurrency practice that's like really built out, and med tech and therapeutics and cell therapy, like these things are all going to start becoming like more deeper and more specialized, I think, in the next decade.